The blood on her hands wasn't hers, but Lydia Thornwell knew it would be the reason she died tonight. She pressed herself against the cold stone wall of the corridor, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps that echoed too loudly in the oppressive silence. The mansion? No. The castle, because that's what this impossibly vast structure beneath the city truly was, seemed to pulse with ancient malice around her. Every shadow flickered with potential threat. Every draft of air carried whispers in languages she didn't understand. She'd stumbled through a doorway she shouldn't have opened, fled down stairs she shouldn't have descended, and now found herself somewhere that made every instinct scream that humans were never meant to tread here. The ornate door before her was her only option. Behind her she could hear footsteps, multiple sets, moving with the predatory grace of hunters who knew their prey had nowhere left to run. Her colleague's blood was already drying on her palms, tacky and cold. Marcus had been dead before she'd even registered the white-haired figure moving in the darkness of the archive room. One moment they'd been cataloging supposedly rare books for the eccentric collector who'd hired their antiquarian firm, and the next, Marcus was on the floor with his throat torn open, and Lydia was running. She shoved through the door without thinking, then froze. The chamber beyond was vast, circular, and breathtaking in its Gothic grandeur. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadow far above, supported by pillars carved with scenes of battles and coronations that seemed to move in the flickering candlelight. Hundreds of candles burned in silver candelabras, their flames dancing without any breeze to stir them. The walls were lined with books so ancient their spines were cracked leather and gold leaf, and between the shelves hung portraits of pale, beautiful people with crimson eyes and expressions of eternal hauteur. But what commanded her attention, what made her heart stop completely in her chest, was the figure seated in the throne-like chair at the room's center. He was reading. A man, though she knew immediately, viscerally, that he was no man at all, sat with one long leg crossed over the other, a leather-bound volume held in pale, elegant fingers. His hair fell like a waterfall of pure white silk past his shoulders, contrasting sharply with the black velvet of his coat and the deep crimson of his vest. His skin was alabaster, smooth and perfect as carved marble, and when he lifted his eyes from the page to regard her, she saw they were the color of fresh blood. Well, he said, and his voice was like dark honey and crushed velvet, carrying an accent she couldn't quite place, something ancient and refined that spoke of courts and ballrooms long turned to dust. This is unexpected. Lydia couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The door clicked shut behind her with terrible finality. The vampire, and there was no question now what he was, what all the pale figures in this underground realm were, set his book aside with deliberate care. He uncrossed his legs and stood, and she realized he was tall, perhaps 6.5 feet, with the bearing of someone accustomed to absolute authority. Every movement was fluid grace, predatory and precise. "You are," he continued, tilting his head slightly as he studied her with those unsettling crimson eyes, "very much not supposed to be here. Do you have any idea where here is?" Her voice came out as a broken whisper. She tried again, forcing the words past her terror. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Someone killed Marcus, and I ran, and someone." His lips curved slightly, though it wasn't quite a smile. "How delicate. Yes, I imagine one of the court guards discovered your trespass in the archives, humans cataloging our histories. How Theodore thought that would go unnoticed, I cannot fathom. My cousin's optimism regarding your kind has always exceeded his judgment." He began to walk toward her, each step measured and unhurried. Lydia's back was already against the door. There was nowhere to go. "Please," she whispered. "I didn't see anything. I won't tell anyone. I'll leave the city. "You're in my private chambers," he interrupted, his tone almost conversational. "These rooms are forbidden to everyone in this court save myself and those I explicitly permit entry. The last person who entered uninvited was a century ago. Would you like to know what happened to him?" Lydia's throat was too tight to answer. Tears burned in her eyes. He stopped a few feet away, studying her with an expression that was clinical, detached, as though she were a curious specimen rather than a person. "You're trembling. Your heart is beating so rapidly I can hear it from here. The scent of your fear is—" He paused, inhaling slightly. Overwhelming, and yet you're still standing. Not begging, not attempting to flee. Interesting. I don't think begging would help, Lydia managed. Would it? No, he agreed. It rarely does, but most humans try anyway. He turned away from her then, moving to a side table where an elegant tea service was arranged, fine porcelain cups and a steaming pot that suggested he'd been about to pour when she'd interrupted him. The casual dismissal of her as a threat was somehow more terrifying than if he'd simply attacked. "What's your name?" he asked, reaching for the teapot. "Lydia. Lydia Thornwell." "Well, Lydia Thornwell, you've created quite the predicament." He poured dark liquid into 2 cups with steady hands. "By all rights and laws of this court, your death should be immediate and unquestioned. You've seen what you should not have seen, entered where you should not have entered. The penalty is absolute." "Then why are you making tea?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Now he did smile, and it transformed his face from merely beautiful to absolutely devastating. "An excellent question. I find myself asking the same thing." He lifted 1 cup, inhaled its steam, then set it down and gestured to the other. "Sit. Drink. If I'm going to kill you, I'd prefer to do so with some civility." "That's insane." "Perhaps. But you have 2 choices, Miss Thornwell. You may stand there against that door, frozen in terror, until I lose patience and end this swiftly. Or you may sit, share tea with the king you've so rudely interrupted, and perhaps find yourself with a 3rd option you haven't yet considered." "King." The word came out faint. He inclined his head, a gesture of acknowledgement that carried centuries of authority. "Aleksander Drăculești, first of my line. Sovereign of the Night Court, lord of this realm and all territories bound to it. A title I've held for longer than your language has existed in its current form. And you, little human, are drinking tea with me whether you wish to or not, because your alternatives are significantly less appealing." Lydia's legs were shaking so badly she wasn't sure they'd carry her, but she pushed away from the door. Each step toward the small table beside his throne felt like walking toward her own execution, but something in his words, in his demeanor, suggested he meant what he said. If he'd wanted her dead, she'd be dead. The fact that she wasn't, that he'd offered her tea instead of simply tearing her throat out, meant something. She had no idea what, but she'd cling to that uncertainty like a lifeline. She sank into the chair opposite his throne, and he handed her the delicate cup. The liquid inside was dark as night and fragrant with bergamot and something else, something subtle and unfamiliar. Her hands shook as she raised it to her lips. "It's not poisoned," Aleksander said, settling back into his throne with feline grace. "Contrary to popular fiction, we don't need poison. We're rather effective without it." Lydia sipped. The tea was perfect, warming her from the inside, settling her racing heart by infinitesimal degrees. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why not just kill me?" "I'm still deciding," he replied with unsettling honesty. "You've presented an unusual situation. On one hand, law demands your death. On the other, you intrigue me, and I'm not easily intrigued after several millennia of existence. What about me could possibly be intriguing?" He leaned forward slightly, those crimson eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel naked, exposed, as though he could see through flesh and bone to her very soul. "You came through that door expecting death. You knew what you'd find here. Perhaps not me specifically, but you understood you'd stumbled into the heart of something dangerous, something that would kill you for the knowledge you now possess. And yet when faced with me, when faced with certain death, you didn't grovel. You asked questions, you challenged the absurdity of the situation. That suggests either remarkable courage or remarkable stupidity, and I find myself curious which it is." "Probably stupidity," Lydia admitted. "I'm terrified. I've never been this scared in my life. But you're right, I don't think begging would change anything, so what's the point?" "Pragmatic." He sipped his own tea, his movements refined and deliberate. "Tell me how you came to be here. Start from the beginning." So she did. The words spilled out of her in a rush, how the antiquarian firm she worked for had been contacted by someone named Theodore, how they'd been offered an enormous sum to catalog a private collection, how she and Marcus had been brought to what they'd thought was simply an eccentric, wealthy collector's basement library, how the rooms had kept going down, deeper and deeper, far below any normal building's foundation. How they'd realized too late that something was very wrong. How Marcus had opened the wrong cabinet and the creature had appeared from nowhere, and then he was dead, and she was running. Aleksander listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Theodore," he finally said, "is going to find himself severely disciplined for this catastrophic lapse in judgment. He knows the protocols. Humans are permitted in the outer archives only with explicit approval and constant supervision. The fact that he allowed 2 of you to wander unsupervised into the restricted sections." He shook his head. "Marcus's death is on his conscience now, and yours may be as well." "Maybe?" Lydia latched onto the phrase. "Does that mean there's a chance I survive this?" "A small one." He set down his cup. "The law is absolute, Miss Thornwell. You've seen our realm, our court, our existence. Humans who gain this knowledge cannot be permitted to return to their world with it. The consequences would be catastrophic for both our kinds. So you have 3 options, and none of them involve walking out of here and resuming your normal life." Her chest tightened. "What are they?" "Death, obviously. Quick, painless if I'm feeling merciful, which I am, occasionally. And the others? Transformation. I could turn you, make you one of us. You'd retain your memories, your essential self, but you'd become vampire, bound to this court, subject to its laws and protections. You'd never see sunlight again, never taste human food, never grow old or die except by violence. Some humans choose this. Some beg for it." Lydia thought about that, about living forever in shadows, about drinking blood, about becoming the thing that had killed Marcus. Her stomach churned. "That's not a real choice. That's erasing who I am." Perceptive, there was approval in his tone. "Which brings us to the 3rd option, and the one I find myself most inclined toward, though I cannot fathom why." "What is it?" Aleksander stood, moving to one of the tall windows. Heavy curtains kept out any hint of exterior light. He drew one back slightly, revealing not a window but a screen showing the city above glittering lights, nighttime traffic, the modern world continuing in ignorance of the ancient realm beneath its streets. "You could stay," he said quietly. "Here, in this court. As a human, but bound to it, bound to me specifically, under my protection and authority. You would live here, learn our ways, serve a purpose I have yet to define. You would be safe from the laws that demand your death, because you'd fall under my personal jurisdiction, but you'd never leave, never return to your world. You'd exist in this space between, neither fully one thing nor another." "A prisoner." "A guest under permanent protection," he corrected. "The distinction matters." "Does it?" She stood as well, her fear slowly being replaced by something else, anger, perhaps, or simply exhaustion with being afraid. "You're describing a cage. A comfortable one, maybe, but still a cage." He turned to face her, and something flickered in his expression. "Surprise. Perhaps. Yes, I suppose I am. But it's the only option that allows you to remain alive and human, both, unless you have a better suggestion. Let me go, just let me go, and trust that I won't say anything." "Impossible. I don't trust humans that far, and more importantly, the rest of the court would never accept it. I may be king, but even my authority has limits when it comes to our most fundamental laws. If I simply released you, someone else would hunt you down within days. Your death would be significantly less pleasant than what I'm offering." Lydia wrapped her arms around herself, the full weight of her situation finally crashing down. "So I'm dead, or I'm a monster, or I'm a prisoner. Those are my choices." "Yes, that's not fair." "No," Aleksander agreed, "it's not. But fairness has never been a feature of the relationship between our kinds. We are predators, Miss Thornwell. You are prey. The fact that I'm offering you any choice at all is more mercy than most of my kind would extend." She wanted to scream, to rage at the injustice of it. She'd done nothing wrong except take a job and try to survive when monsters appeared, and now her entire life was forfeit because she'd run the wrong direction. "How long do I have to decide?" she asked. "Until you finish your tea?" She looked down at the cup, still half full, then back up at him. He wasn't joking. That's not enough time for a decision like this. Time is a luxury you no longer possess. But he moved back to his throne, settling into it with the ease of someone who'd sat there for centuries. Ask me anything you wish while you consider. I'll answer honestly. It's the least I can offer. Lydia returned to her chair, her mind racing. Questions bubbled up, 1,000 of them, all competing for attention. She seized on the most immediate. What would staying here actually mean? What would I do? I haven't entirely decided, Aleksander admitted. This situation is unprecedented for me. I've never kept a human companion before. Some members of the court have servants, lovers, scholars, humans who chose our world over their own for various reasons. They're protected, valued in their specific roles. You would be under my direct protection, which means you'd be untouchable. No one would dare harm you without facing my wrath. But what would I be to you? A pet? A servant? What? His eyes met hers, and she saw something in them she couldn't quite name. I don't know yet. Perhaps you could help me understand your kind better. I've lived among humans for millennia, watched your civilizations rise and fall, but I've rarely truly understood you. You could be a bridge, an advisor of sorts, or perhaps simply someone to talk to who doesn't have the same tired perspectives as vampires who've existed as long as I have. So a curiosity, something to alleviate your boredom. Would that be so terrible? You'd be safe, comfortable, free to pursue whatever interests you wished within the bounds of this realm. We have libraries that would make your antiquarian heart sing, Miss Thornwell. Collections of knowledge your world believes lost, art, music, culture from every age of human existence, preserved perfectly. He paused. And you'd be alive. Alive but alone. Everyone I know would think I died or disappeared. My family has already been informed of your death, he interrupted gently. The moment you entered the restricted archives, protocols began. There will be a body, an accident, all evidence supporting a tragic but mundane explanation. Theodore, at least, is competent in that regard. Your family is grieving you right now. Miss Thornwell, to them, you're already gone. The words hit her like a physical blow. Her mother, her sister, her friends, they thought she was dead. She wanted to call it a lie, but she could see the truth in his ancient eyes. This was how they operated, how they'd stayed hidden for so long, clean, efficient, erasing all evidence. So I'm already dead to them, she whispered. Yes, I'm sorry for that, truly. She believed him, which was perhaps the strangest thing of all. This creature, this king of monsters, seemed genuinely regretful about the pain her family would feel. If I stay, can I ever contact them, let them know I'm alive? No, the separation must be complete. Lydia closed her eyes, fighting back tears. And if I choose transformation? The same applies. Either way, Lydia Thornwell as she was ceases to exist in the human world. Then what does it matter which I choose? It matters to you, I think, whether you remain fundamentally yourself or become something else entirely. That's not a choice I can make for you. She opened her eyes, studying him. He was beautiful in the way a classical sculpture was beautiful, perfect, cold, eternal. But there was something else there, too, something in the way he held himself, the way he looked at her. Loneliness, perhaps. The weight of too many years, too many lifetimes. Why do you care? She asked. About giving me choices, I mean. You could just kill me or turn me and be done with it. Why does my preference matter to you? Aleksander was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before. Because in 3,000 years of existence, I've learned that the choices we make define us more than our nature ever could. I've seen humans commit acts of breathtaking cruelty, and vampires demonstrate profound kindness. What we are matters less than what we choose to be. And I find I want to know what you'll choose, who you are when faced with impossible decisions. That's still treating me like an experiment. Yes, he agreed, but an experiment I'm genuinely invested in. You don't have to like me, Miss Thornwell. You don't have to trust me. But I'm offering you life on the only terms I can. Take it or don't. Lydia looked down at her tea. It was almost gone. A few sips left, perhaps. Then she'd have to decide. She thought about death quick, final, an end to this nightmare. thought about transformation becoming something other, powerful but monstrous, and thought about remaining herself, but trapped in this underground realm forever. Which was worse? Which was better? Did it matter? "If I stay," she said slowly, "as a human under your protection, could I leave these chambers, or would I be confined here? You'd have access to most of the court. There are dangerous areas, certainly, but you'd be free to move through the safe zones, to explore, to learn. And the other vampires? Would they accept me? With my protection, they'd have no choice. Some would resent your presence, others might be curious, but none would dare harm you. What about feeding? Would you? She couldn't finish the question. Understanding flickered across his face. Would I feed from you? Is that what you're asking? She nodded, not trusting her voice. No, not unless you explicitly consented, which I would never ask. I don't feed from unwilling humans. It's a personal code, not common among my kind, but one I've maintained for a very long time. You would be safe from that. And other vampires? The same applies. You'd be under my protection. To touch you without permission would be to challenge me directly. No one is that foolish. Lydia finished her tea, setting the empty cup down with a soft clink. Her hands were steadier now, her breathing more controlled. The decision crystallized in her mind, not because it was good, but because the alternatives were worse. I'll stay, she said, as myself, human, under your protection. Alexander's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. Relief, perhaps, or satisfaction. You're certain? No, but I'm not certain about anything anymore, so I might as well choose the option that keeps me alive in myself. He stood, extending his hand to her. Then welcome to the night court, Lydia Thornwell. I'll have chambers prepared for you, suitable clothing provided, and a formal announcement made. As of this moment, you are under the personal protection of the crown. No one will harm you while I draw breath. She stood as well, but didn't take his hand. Not yet. What happens now? Now I introduce you to a world that's existed beneath yours since before your ancestors learned to write. Now you learn what it truly means to live among vampires. And now? He paused, a slight curve to his lips that might have been a genuine smile. Now I discover whether my curiosity about you proves justified, or if I've made a terrible mistake. That makes two of us, Lydia said. This time she took his offered hand. His skin was cool, smooth as silk, and the strength in his grip suggested he could crush her bones without effort, but his touch was gentle as he led her toward the chamber door. One more thing, he said, pausing before opening it. Thank you. For what? For choosing to stay. For giving me something I didn't realize I wanted until you stumbled through that door. What's that? He looked at her, and for the first time, his expression was completely unguarded. Someone who might surprise me. Then he opened the door, and Lydia's new life began. The corridor beyond Alexander's chambers was nothing like the panicked blur Lydia remembered from her flight. Now, with the Vampire King at her side, she could actually see it, soaring ceilings painted with murals of night skies and ancient battles, walls of polished black marble veined with silver, torches burning with flames that gave off no smoke. Every few yards they passed other vampires, all of whom immediately stopped and bowed deeply when they saw Alexander. Each one was beautiful in that same unsettling way he was, pale skin, white or silver hair, eyes in shades of red and crimson and blood. They wore clothing that ranged from archaic doublets and high-collared gowns to surprisingly modern suits and dresses, all in dark, rich colors. And every single one of them stared at Lydia with expressions ranging from shock to fascination to barely concealed disdain. They're not happy I'm here, she murmured. They're confused, Alexander corrected. Humans in the court are rare but not unheard of. Humans under my personal protection are unprecedented. They'll adjust, or they'll learn to hide their displeasure more effectively. He led her through a maze of corridors and down several flights of stairs, carved from what looked like obsidian. The air grew cooler, and Lydia realized with a start that they must be incredibly deep underground. How far beneath the city did this realm extend? We occupy the spaces your kind forgot existed, Alexander said, as though reading her thoughts. Old subway tunnels, abandoned mine shafts, natural cave systems. Over centuries we've expanded them, connected them, made them into something far grander. This complex extends beneath most of the city and beyond, miles of territory, all hidden from human eyes. How many vampires live here? In this court? Several hundred, worldwide, thousands, perhaps tens of thousands. We're not as numerous as humans, but we're not extinct either. We adapt, survive, endure. They entered a vast circular hall dominated by a fountain in its center. But instead of water, dark red liquid flowed through it, filling the air with a scent that made Lydia's stomach turn. "Blood," she whispered. "Yikare." "Yes, donated from willing humans, mostly. We have arrangements with blood banks, hospitals, certain organizations that understand what we are and what we need. Violence is not necessary for survival, merely tradition in some circles. I've worked to move our court away from the old ways, toward coexistence rather than predation. That fountain is a bit on the nose then, isn't it?" He actually laughed, a rich, genuine sound. "It's centuries old, installed by my predecessor. I keep meaning to replace it with something less theatrical, but tradition dies hard, even among progressives." They passed through the hall and into a quieter wing. Here the atmosphere shifted from public grandeur to private comfort. The corridors were narrower, lined with doors of dark wood carved with intricate designs. Alexander stopped before one and produced an old-fashioned iron key. "These will be your chambers," he said, unlocking the door. "They've been unused for some time, but they're among the finest in the court outside the royal apartments." The rooms beyond were breathtaking. A sitting area decorated in deep burgundy and gold gave way to a bedroom with a four-poster bed draped in silk. Bookshelves lined one wall, already filled with leather-bound volumes. A writing desk sat near a false window that displayed, like the one in Alexander's chambers, a screen showing the city above. A doorway led to a bathroom that looked like something from a luxury hotel, all marble and gold fixtures. Lydia struggled for words. "This is incredible. I'm glad you approve. Clothing will be provided by morning-evening, rather. We keep inverse hours here. Night is our day. You'll need to adjust your sleep schedule accordingly." "How do people even tell time down here?" "We don't particularly. Time is a human concern. We simply exist." He moved toward the door. "Rest. Acclimate. Tomorrow evening I'll begin introducing you to the court properly. For now you're safe here. The door locks from inside and no one will disturb you." "Wait." Lydia caught his arm without thinking, then immediately released it, startled by her own boldness. "I just thank you. For not killing me. For giving me options, even if they weren't great ones. Thank you." Alexander studied her for a long moment. "You're welcome, Lydia Thornwell. Sleep well." Then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him, and Lydia was alone. She made it to the bed before the shaking started. Great, racking sobs that she'd been holding back since Marcus died, since she'd run, since her entire life had been ripped away and replaced with this impossible reality. She cried until she had nothing left, until exhaustion dragged her down into fitful sleep, still wearing her blood-stained clothes. When she woke, disoriented and aching, there was no way to tell how long she'd slept. The screen window showed the same nighttime city, but the room had changed. Her stained clothing had been replaced with a silk nightgown she had no memory of changing, and the wardrobe now stood open, revealing an array of dresses and more modern clothes in dark, rich fabrics. A note sat on the bedside table in elegant handwriting. "Clothing as promised. Join me for breakfast or dinner, by your reckoning when you're ready. Pull the bell cord by the door, and someone will guide you to the dining hall. A." Lydia showered, scrubbing away the last physical traces of her old life, then examined the wardrobe's contents. She chose a simple black dress with long sleeves and a modest neckline, something that seemed appropriate for dining with a vampire king. The fit was perfect, as though whoever had provided it knew her measurements exactly. The thought should have been creepy, but she was too tired to care. She pulled the bell cord, and within moments there was a soft knock. She opened the door to find a young woman with the telltale pale skin and white hair of a vampire, though her eyes were a softer pink rather than deep red. "Miss Thornwell," the woman said with a slight curtsy. "I'm Isolde. I've been assigned to assist you during your time here. If you'll follow me, His Majesty is waiting." The dining hall was smaller than Lydia expected, more intimate than grand. A long table dominated the space, but only two places were set, one at the head and one to its right. Aleksander stood as she entered, dressed now in a more modern black suit that somehow made him look even more imposing. "You look rested," he said, pulling out her chair. "I look like I've been crying for hours, but thank you for the polite lie." She sat, and he returned to his seat. The table before her held an array of human food, fruits, bread, cheese, even a steaming cup of coffee. Before him sat only a crystal goblet filled with dark red liquid. "I wasn't sure what you'd like, so I had the kitchen prepare variety," he said. "You have a kitchen? For human food?" "We have several humans in the court. They need to eat, and some vampires enjoy cooking as a hobby, believe it or not. We may not need food, but we remember it." Lydia selected some fruit and bread, suddenly ravenous. "How long was I asleep?" "Approximately 16 hours. It's evening now by human reckoning. The court is waking, which means you'll begin meeting them soon." "I'm not sure I'm ready for that." "No one is ever ready for their first introduction to vampire society. But you'll do fine. You've already proven you have courage. Running away and hiding isn't courage. Surviving is." He sipped from his goblet, and Lydia tried not to think about what he was drinking. "You've had time to reflect. Do you have questions?" "I imagine you have hundreds." "Thousands," she admitted, "but I'll start with an obvious one. Why do all of you look the way you do? The white hair, pale skin. Is that just what happens when someone is turned? It's a mark of our nature. When a human is transformed, the change purges certain aspects of their mortality. Pigmentation fades, features refine. We become, in a sense, idealized versions of ourselves, eternal, unchanging. Some consider it beautiful, others find it unsettling." "It's both," Lydia said honestly. "You're all beautiful, but it's an uncanny beauty, inhuman. An apt description. We are inhuman after all. We've shed our humanity for power and immortality. There's always a price. Do you miss it? Being human?" The question seemed to surprise him. He set down his goblet, considering. "I've been a vampire for so long that my human life feels like a dream. I remember fragments, warmth of the sun, taste of wine, the beat of my own heart. But they're distant, abstracted. I don't know if I miss them or if I simply miss the concept of missing them. That sounds lonely. It is. Immortality is lonely by nature. You watch everyone and everything you care about fade while you endure. It's why many of my kind become cold, detached. Caring hurts too much when it's always temporary." Lydia met his eyes. "Is that why you've never kept a human companion before? Because you knew they'd die eventually?" "Perhaps, or perhaps I simply never found one worth the inevitable pain." He paused. "Until possibly now." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Lydia's heart quickened. "You don't know me," she said softly. "No, but I'd like to, if you're willing." Before she could respond, the dining hall doors opened and a vampire strode in. He was slightly shorter than Aleksander, dressed in an ornate coat that looked like it belonged in the 18th century, his white hair pulled back in a queue. His eyes were bright crimson, and his expression was furious. "Cousin," he said, his voice dripping with barely controlled rage, "we need to speak, now." Alexander's demeanor shifted instantly, from conversational to commanding. "Theodore, I was wondering when you'd appear." So, this was Theodore, the cousin who'd brought Lydia and Marcus into this nightmare. She stood instinctively, though she wasn't sure whether to flee or fight. Theodore's gaze snapped to her, and she saw recognition in his eyes. The human. "You didn't kill her." "Obviously not." "Aleksander, do you have any idea what you've done? The court is in an uproar. A human under your personal protection, living here permanently? It's unprecedented. It's—" "My decision to make," Aleksander interrupted, his voice cold enough to freeze. "As king. Or have you forgotten who holds authority here?" "I haven't forgotten anything, including the protocols I violated bringing humans into the archives in the first place. One is already dead because of my mistake. I accept responsibility for that. But she," he pointed at Lydia, "she should be dead too. The law is clear. The law is also clear that I have absolute authority over matters of royal protection. Lydia Thornwell is now under my personal jurisdiction. That supersedes general law." The council will never accept this. The council will accept what I tell them to accept. The two vampires stared at each other, the tension so thick Lydia could barely breathe. Finally, Theodore looked away, bowing slightly. As you command, Your Majesty. But don't expect this to go smoothly. There will be challenges. Let them come. I've weathered worse. Alexander's tone softened slightly. Your intentions were good, Theodore. I understand you were trying to bridge our world with theirs to foster understanding, but it was reckless, and a man died because of it. Make your penance, but don't presume to tell me how to handle the consequences. Theodore nodded stiffly. Of course. My apologies. He glanced once more at Lydia, his expression unreadable, then left as abruptly as he'd arrived. Lydia sank back into her chair. He's right, isn't he? This is going to cause problems. Yes, but problems can be managed. I've been managing this court for 3 millennia. A bit of controversy won't break it. Why are you doing this, really? You could avoid all of it by just getting rid of me. Alexander returned to his seat, picking up his goblet again. I told you already. You intrigue me. That's not enough reason to risk political upheaval. Isn't it? When you've lived as long as I have, when you've seen and done everything 1,000 times over, intrigue is precious. You're a variable I can't predict, Lydia. You're chaos in a world that's become too ordered, and I find I'm willing to weather considerable trouble for that. You're insane. Quite possibly, he smiled. But I'm also king, which means my insanity becomes law. Now finish your breakfast. We have a long evening ahead. Over the following days or nights, by vampire reckoning, Lydia began to understand the scope of the world she'd fallen into. Alexander was true to his word, introducing her to the court gradually but thoroughly. She met the council, a group of ancient vampires who governed various aspects of court life. They regarded her with everything from cold curiosity to thinly veiled hostility, but none dared challenge Alexander's decision openly. She learned that the court was organized in a complex hierarchy of bloodlines and houses, alliances, and feuds that stretched back centuries. Aleksander's line, the Drăculești, was the oldest and most powerful, but it was not unopposed. She explored the libraries, vast collections of books and scrolls and tablets in languages living and dead. A vampire named Lucian, who served as the court's chief archivist, showed her texts from ancient Sumer, from Rome, from civilizations she'd only read about in history books. He was one of the few who seemed genuinely pleased by her presence. Fresh perspective, he had said, his pink-tinged eyes warm. You see these texts with human eyes, not weighted by centuries of interpretation. Your insights might prove valuable. She attended court gatherings, formal affairs where vampires in elaborate dress discussed politics and art and matters she barely understood. Alexander was always at her side during these events, a silent but powerful protector. She noticed how the other vampires watched them, speculation clear in their gazes. And she spent hours with Alexander himself, in his private chambers or walking the quieter corridors of the court. They talked about everything her life before, his impossibly long existence, philosophy and art, and the fundamental differences between human and vampire nature. He was brilliant, cultured, and surprisingly funny when he chose to be. His humor was dry and dark, but it made her laugh despite everything. She found herself looking forward to their conversations, to the way his eyes focused entirely on her when she spoke, as though her words were the most important thing in his world. She noticed small things about him, the way he unconsciously straightened books that were askew, how he always poured tea with his left hand, the slight softening of his expression when he thought she wasn't watching. And she noticed how he looked at her, with an intensity that made her breath catch. 3 weeks into her new life, everything changed. She was in the library studying a manuscript on medieval art that Lucian had recommended when raised voices echoed from the corridor outside. Moments later, the door burst open, and a vampire she'd never seen before strode in. He was older than most she'd met, his white hair long and wild, his red eyes burning with fanatical intensity. He wore robes rather than modern clothing, and something about him screamed danger. "The human pet," he said, his voice a rasp. "I finally find you alone." Lydia stood, backing away instinctively. "I'm under the king's protection. You can't." The king's protection is a farce, an insult to our laws and traditions. You should be dead, mortal, and I will correct that mistake." He moved toward her with inhuman speed, and Lydia barely had time to scream before he was on her, his hand closing around her throat, lifting her off her feet. She clawed at his grip, unable to breathe, black spots dancing in her vision. Then he was gone, ripped away from her with such force she heard something crack. She collapsed, gasping, and looked up to see Aleksander holding the other vampire by the throat, fury radiating from him in waves. "Mikhail," Aleksander said, his voice deadly quiet, "you have made a catastrophic error in judgment." "She is an abomination," Mikhail choked out, "a violation of everything we stand for. Kill me if you must, but I spoke truth. Oh, I'm going to do far more than kill you." What happened next was brutal and swift. Aleksander moved with a violence Lydia had never seen in him, every motion precise and devastating. Within seconds, Mikhail was on the ground, Aleksander's foot on his chest, one hand wrapped in the other, vampire's hair. "You touched what is mine," Aleksander said. "You violated my explicit protection. You challenged my authority in the most fundamental way possible. Do you understand what that means?" "I understand you've gone mad," Mikhail spat. "Protecting a human, treating her like she matters, you've become weak." "Then let me demonstrate my weakness." Aleksander pulled, and Mikhail's head came away from his body with a sound Lydia would never forget. The body crumbled to ash almost instantly, and the head followed moments later, leaving only a pile of gray dust on the library floor. Aleksander turned to Lydia, his eyes still blazing with fury, but his hands gentle as he checked her throat, her face. "Are you hurt?" "Did he—" "I'm okay," she managed, though her voice was raw. "You killed him." "Yes. And I'll kill anyone else who touches you. I meant what I said, Lydia. You are under my protection, and I will enforce that with absolute prejudice." She should have been terrified. She'd just watched him decapitate someone without hesitation, watched a vampire turn to ash before her eyes. But instead, she felt something else entirely. Safety, gratitude, and something deeper, warmer, that she wasn't ready to name. "Thank you," she whispered. He pulled her into his arms, and she went without resistance, burying her face against his chest. He was cool and solid and impossibly strong, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she felt truly safe. "I will not let anyone harm you," he murmured into her hair. "I swear it. You are mine to protect, and I have never failed in my promises." "Yours," she repeated softly. The word should have felt possessive, threatening. Instead, it felt like an anchor. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, while the ashes of the vampire who'd tried to kill her drifted slowly to the floor. That night, Aleksander called an emergency assembly of the entire court. Lydia stood beside his throne, visible to everyone, while he addressed the gathered vampires. "Mikhail of the House of Corvinus attempted to murder Lydia Thornwell this evening," he announced, his voice carrying through the vast chamber. "In doing so, he violated my direct protection and challenged my authority as king. He paid for that violation with his life, as will anyone else who makes the same mistake. Let me be absolutely clear. Lydia is under my personal protection. She is mine. To touch her, to threaten her, to even contemplate harm against her is to declare war against me personally. Is that understood?" Silence greeted his words, heavy and absolute. "I asked if that is understood," Aleksander repeated, power crackling in his voice. "Yes, Your Majesty," the assembled court responded in unison. "Good. Mikhail's house will be disbanded, his assets redistributed. Let his fate serve as reminder that my will is law in this court and my protection is absolute. This assembly is concluded." As the vampires filed out, Lydia noticed the way they looked at her now, not with disdain or curiosity, but with something closer to fear. She was no longer just the human oddity. She was the human the king had killed for. That changed everything. Back in Aleksander's chambers, Lydia finally let herself shake. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her exhausted and overwhelmed. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "The big declaration, the public display. You didn't have to make it so definitive." "Yes, I did. Half measures invite further challenges. Now everyone knows exactly where you stand, exactly what harming you would cost. You're safe now, truly safe. I'm also completely isolated. No vampire is going to approach me now if they think you'll take their head off for it. Some will, in time. The braver ones, or the more politically savvy who see advantage in allying with you. He moved to the tea service, pouring 2 cups with steady hands. But yes, your position is complicated. You're human in a vampire court, protected by a king who's made it clear you're precious to him. That makes you powerful and vulnerable simultaneously. Precious, Lydia repeated, accepting the cup he offered. You said I was yours. What did you mean by that? Alexander was quiet for a moment, studying his tea. When he spoke, his voice was careful. I meant that I've claimed responsibility for you, that your welfare is my personal concern, that's all. Is it? He looked at her then, and the intensity in his gaze stole her breath. What do you want it to mean, Lydia? The question hung between them, charged with possibility. Lydia's heart raced. She should say nothing, should keep this professional, should remember that he was a vampire and a king and immortal, and she was just a human who'd stumbled into his world by accident. But she'd never been good at doing what she should. I don't know, she admitted. I just know that when you held me today, when you promised to protect me, it felt like more than duty, and I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything with it. He set down his cup, moving closer. We have time, Lydia. All the time you need to figure out what you want, what this is. I've waited 3,000 years. I can wait longer. For what? For you to trust me, to see me as more than your captor or protector. To perhaps... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. To perhaps feel a fraction of what I've begun to feel for you. Lydia's breath caught. And what is that? I don't have a name for it yet. Fascination, certainly. Protectiveness, obviously. But there's more. When I'm with you, the centuries feel less heavy. When you speak, I find myself genuinely curious about your thoughts, rather than simply tolerating conversation. When that vampire had his hands on you today, I felt rage unlike anything I've experienced in millennia. If that's not the beginning of something profound, I don't know what is. She should step back, should maintain distance. Instead, she reached out, placing her hand over his. His skin was cool, but his fingers immediately curled around hers, gentle and secure. I'm scared, she whispered. Of this. Of you. Of what I'm starting to feel. You're a vampire, an immortal king. I'm just a human who's going to age and die in what probably feels like a blink to you. How can this possibly work? I don't know, he admitted, but I'd like to try, if you're willing. She looked up at him, at his ancient crimson eyes and timeless face, and made another choice that defied logic. I'm willing, she said. He smiled, genuine and warm, and lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a cool kiss to her knuckles. Then we have time to discover what this becomes. Over the following weeks, something shifted between them. The conversations grew deeper, more personal. Alexander shared stories from his impossibly long life, not the grand political moments, but the small human ones he'd witnessed. A child's laughter in ancient Rome. The first time he'd heard Mozart perform. The way the world had looked the morning after electricity had first lit a city. Lydia shared her own stories, tiny and insignificant by comparison, but treasured nonetheless. Her childhood, her family, her dreams of becoming a historian, of uncovering lost knowledge. Alexander listened as though every word was precious, and maybe to him it was. He showed her parts of the court she hadn't seen, a garden of night-blooming flowers, tended by vampire cultivators, a gallery of art spanning millennia, a chamber where musicians played compositions by humans long dead. He introduced her to vampires who were kind, who welcomed her presence, who saw her as more than just the king's oddity, and she began to see him not as a monster or a king, but as simply Alexander. Brilliant and lonely and burdened by the weight of too many years, but also capable of gentleness, of humor, of care. She caught him watching her sometimes with an expression of such tenderness it made her chest ache, and she knew her own face reflected the same when she looked at him. They didn't touch beyond occasional hand-holding, didn't kiss or do anything that would make the growing feeling between them undeniable. But it was there, building like a storm, inevitable and overwhelming. 2 months after Lydia's arrival, Theodore requested an audience with both of them. They met in Alexander's study, a smaller, more intimate space lined with books and maps. "I owe you an apology, Miss Thornwell," Theodore said without preamble. "My recklessness brought you here, cost your colleague his life, and nearly cost yours multiple times. I've spent these weeks trying to make amends, to justify what I did, but there's no justification. I'm sorry." Lydia studied him. He looked genuinely remorseful, his usually proud bearing diminished. "I appreciate the apology, but Marcus is still dead, and I'm still trapped here. Words don't change that." "No, they don't, which is why I wanted to offer you something more substantial." He glanced at Alexander. "With your permission, cousin?" Alexander gestured for him to continue. Theodore pulled a small device from his pocket, a smartphone, Lydia realized with shock. "The court has strict rules about human technology, but there are exceptions. I've secured you limited access to the outside world. You can't contact anyone directly, can't reveal where you are or what's happened to you. But you can see that your family's okay, read news, stay connected to the world above. It's not freedom, but it's something." Lydia took the phone with trembling hands. "I can see my family?" "Their social media, public records, anything accessible online. Just, please be careful. Don't do anything that would reveal you're alive. It would put them in danger." She looked at Alexander, who nodded. "I approved this. I know the separation from your old life has been difficult. This isn't much, but it's what we can safely offer." Lydia felt tears burn her eyes. "Thank you, both of you." Theodore bowed and left, and Lydia immediately began searching for her mother's social media profile. There she was, posting pictures of her garden, of Lydia's sister's new baby. They looked okay. Sad. Certainly several posts mentioned missing Lydia, but they were surviving, moving forward. "They're okay," she whispered. "They're going to be okay." Alexander moved to stand behind her, his hand coming to rest gently on her shoulder. "I'm glad. I know it doesn't erase the pain of separation, but perhaps it eases it slightly." She set the phone down and turned to face him, still seated. He stood close, and from this angle, she had to look up to meet his eyes. "You arranged this, convinced Theodore, got the court to allow it, for me." "Yes." "Why? You've already given me so much. Protection, a home here, your time. Why this too?" "Because you deserve happiness, Lydia. Because even trapped in this world, you should have some connection to the one you left behind. Because—" He paused, lifting his hand to cup her cheek with infinite gentleness. "Because I care about you, more than I should, perhaps, but I've stopped fighting it." Lydia leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. "I've stopped fighting it too. Whatever this is between us, I don't want to resist it anymore." "Lydia." Her name on his lips was a prayer and a promise. "Look at me." She opened her eyes, and the expression on his face stole her breath. Longing, tenderness, desire, all there, undisguised. "I'm going to kiss you," he said softly. "If you don't want that, tell me now." Instead of answering with words, she stood, closing the small distance between them, and pressed her lips to his. He was cool against her, his mouth gentle but demanding. One hand remained cupping her face while the other came around her waist, pulling her flush against him. She wound her arms around his neck, losing herself in the sensation. He tasted like tea and something uniquely him, something ancient and powerful and addictive. When they finally broke apart, both breathless she was breathless. He didn't need to breathe. She rested her forehead against his chest. "That was," she started. "Inevitable," he finished. "We've been moving toward this since the night you stumbled into my chambers." "No regrets?" "None. You?" She looked up at him, at his beautiful, inhuman face, and smiled. "None." He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring. And Lydia knew with absolute certainty that she'd fallen in love with a vampire king, and nothing would ever be the same. Their relationship shifted after that night, becoming something undeniably romantic. Alexander courted her in the old-fashioned sense, bringing her gifts of books and jewelry, taking her to private concerts in the court's music hall, spending hours simply talking and being together. He was attentive and protective without being possessive, respecting her independence while making clear his devotion. Lydia had never been courted before, had certainly never been courted by someone with 3 millennia of experience in romance. It was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. The court noticed, of course. Whispers followed them everywhere: the human and the king, the mortal and the immortal, the impossible romance that defied every tradition. Some vampires were scandalized, others found it romantic. A few began treating Lydia with something approaching genuine respect, recognizing that she wasn't just under the king's protection, but held his heart. 3 months into their relationship, during a quiet evening in Aleksander's chambers, Lydia asked the question that had been haunting her. "What happens when I get old?" Aleksander looked up from the book he'd been reading. "What do you mean?" "I'm human. I age. In 10 years, I'll have wrinkles and gray hair. In 30, I'll be elderly. In 50, I'll probably be dead. And you'll look exactly the same as you do now. How can this possibly work long term?" He set his book aside, his expression serious. "I've thought about this extensively. There are 3 paths forward, and the choice is entirely yours. Tell me. The first is we continue as we are for as long as you remain human. I'll love you through every stage of your life, treasure every moment we have, and when you eventually pass, I'll mourn you and remember you for the rest of my existence." The thought of him grieving her for centuries made her chest ache. "That's heartbreaking." "Yes, but it honors your choice to remain human, to live and age and die as nature intended. Some would say it's the most noble option." "What's the second?" "Transformation. I could turn you, make you vampire, give you immortality. We'd have eternity together, both unchanging, both eternal. You'd become like me in every way." Lydia remembered his earlier offer, the one she'd rejected. "I'd lose my humanity." "In some ways, yes, but you'd retain yourself, your memories, personality, core identity. You'd simply be a vampire version of who you are now. Some humans find great joy in transformation, others regret it." "And the third option?" Aleksander was quiet for a long moment. "There's a ritual, ancient and rarely performed, that can extend human life significantly. Not immortality, but centuries rather than decades. You'd age slowly, retain your humanity, but remain with me far longer than your natural lifespan would allow. The cost is steep, however." "What cost?" "It requires my blood, regularly. Not enough to transform you, but enough to sustain the magic. You'd be bound to me in a very literal sense, dependent on that connection for your extended life. If something happened to me, if I died or we were separated for too long, you'd age rapidly to your true biological age. It's a risk." Lydia processed this, turning over the options in her mind. "Can I think about it?" "Take all the time you need. This is your life, your choice. Whatever you decide, I'll support it." She spent the next week agonizing over the decision. Death seemed wasteful when other options existed, but transformation felt like losing herself. The ritual seemed like a middle ground, but the dependency bothered her. Finally, she realized the answer had been obvious all along. She found Aleksander in the throne room, handling some court business. When he saw her, he immediately dismissed the other vampires and gave her his full attention. "I've decided," she said. "Tell me." "The ritual. I want the extended life option. I want to stay human, but I want centuries with you, not just a few decades. I know it means depending on you, being bound to you, but—" She stepped closer, taking his hands. "I'm already bound to you, Aleksander. I love you. I want whatever option gives us the most time together while letting me stay fundamentally myself." Relief and joy flooded his features. "You're certain?" "Completely." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "Then I'll arrange the ritual. It will take preparation, but within the week we can perform it. And then we'll have time, my love. So much time." "Tell me it doesn't hurt too much," she murmured against his chest. "I won't lie to you. The ritual is painful. My blood is designed to transform, so preventing that transformation while still granting extended life is difficult. But I'll be with you through all of it, and when it's done, you'll have centuries ahead of you. Centuries with me. Then it's worth it." The ritual took place in a hidden chamber deep within the court, attended only by Aleksander and an ancient vampire priestess named Seraphina who specialized in blood magic. The room was circular, carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly, and at its center was a stone altar. Lydia lay upon it, her heart racing with fear and anticipation. Aleksander stood beside her, already having cut his own wrist. Dark blood welled up, and the scent of it filled the air copper and power and something indefinable. "This will bond us," he said quietly. "Not just extend your life, but tie your existence to mine. You'll feel when I'm near, sense my emotions to some degree, and I'll feel the same with you. Are you ready?" "Yes." He pressed his bleeding wrist to her lips. "Drink." She did, and the taste was nothing like she'd expected. Not metallic or unpleasant, but rich and complex, like dark wine and honey and smoke. Power flooded through her, burning, and she gasped. "Keep drinking," Aleksander urged. "Don't stop." The pain began then, spreading from her stomach through her entire body like liquid fire. She wanted to scream, to stop, but Aleksander's other hand held her head gently, encouraging her to continue. She drank until he pulled his wrist away, the wound already healing. Then Serafina began to chant in a language Lydia didn't recognize, and the symbols on the walls began to glow. The pain intensified, and she did scream then, her back arching off the altar. It felt like she was being torn apart and rebuilt simultaneously, every cell in her body rewriting itself. Aleksander's face appeared above hers, and his hand found hers, gripping tight. "I'm here," he said. "Stay with me, Lydia. Fight through it. I'm here." She focused on his eyes, on the cool strength of his hand, and endured. Time lost meaning. The pain could have lasted seconds or hours, she couldn't tell. But eventually, gradually, it began to fade. When it was finally over, she lay gasping on the altar, soaked in sweat but alive. More than alive, she felt different, changed in ways she couldn't articulate, stronger, more aware, as though her senses had been sharpened. "It's done," Serafina announced. "The binding is complete. She'll age approximately 1 year for every decade that passes, not immortal, but long-lived, and tied to you, Your Majesty, as long as you both shall live." Aleksander lifted Lydia from the altar, cradling her against his chest. "You did beautifully," he murmured. "It's over now. Rest." She wanted to respond, but exhaustion dragged her down into darkness. When she woke, she was in Aleksander's bed, not the guest chambers she'd been given, but his own private rooms. He sat beside her, reading, but set the book aside the moment her eyes opened. "How do you feel?" he asked. Lydia took stock. She ached, but it was a distant thing, already fading, and she felt different, more. Strange. Good, I think. Is it really done? Yes. You'll need a few days to fully adjust, but the ritual was successful. You're bound to me now, tied to my life force. You'll live as long as I do, aging slowly, remaining essentially human but enhanced. She sat up carefully, and he helped support her. "I can feel you," she said, surprised. "Not physically, but it's like I know you're there, even when I'm not looking at you. Is that normal? That's the bond. You'll always know where I am, how I'm feeling on a basic level, and I'll know the same about you. It fades with distance, but when we're close, it's quite strong." Lydia tested it, closing her eyes and focusing. There a sense of relief, concern, and underneath it all, deep, abiding love. She opened her eyes to find him watching her with tender amusement. "You feel that?" she asked. "Every bit of it. Just as I feel your curiosity, your residual fear, and your love for me." He leaned in, kissing her softly. "We're connected now, Lydia. Truly connected. For centuries to come." "I love you," she whispered. "I know I haven't said it directly before, but I do. I love you, Aleksander. And I love you. More than I thought myself still capable of loving." He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "We have time now, my darling. All the time we need." The following months were the happiest of Lydia's life. She settled fully into her role in the court, no longer the strange human outsider, but Aleksander's bonded partner, respected and protected. She worked with Lucian in the archives, helping to catalog and preserve the vast knowledge stored there. She made friends among the more progressive vampires, those who saw her as a bridge between worlds rather than an anomaly. And she spent her evenings with Aleksander, talking and laughing and falling deeper in love with every passing day. He was everything she'd never known she wanted, intelligent, passionate, devoted. Yes, he was a vampire and a king, and yes, their relationship defied every conventional boundary. But it worked. They worked. 6 months after the ritual, Aleksander proposed, not with a grand gesture or public display, but quietly, in his chambers, while they were simply existing together in comfortable silence. "Marry me," he said, looking up from the book he'd been reading. Lydia blinked, startled. "What?" "Marry me. Bond yourself to me legally and ceremonially, not just magically. Let me call you my wife, my queen. Let us formalize what we both know is already true, that we belong together." Her heart raced. "You want to marry me? I'm human. You're mine and I'm yours. The details of our biology don't change that. Marry me, Lydia, please." She set down her own book, moving to kneel beside his chair so they were at eye level. "Yes, of course, yes. I love you and I want to be your wife, your queen, whatever that means in this world." He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and she felt through the bond his overwhelming joy, his relief, his love. The wedding was planned for the following month, and the court threw itself into preparations with surprising enthusiasm. Even those vampires who'd initially opposed Lydia's presence seemed caught up in the romance of it all, the king who'd waited millennia for love, the human who'd captured his ancient heart. Lydia's dress was a work of art, deep crimson silk embroidered with silver thread, in patterns that resembled both stars and blood drops. Aleksander wore black velvet with the same silver embroidery, and together they looked like a fairy tale brought to life, the vampire king and his mortal bride. The ceremony took place in the court's grandest chamber, attended by hundreds of vampires and the handful of humans who lived among them. Theodore officiated, having made peace with Lydia's place in Alexander's life. The vows were a blend of human and vampire tradition, promises of eternal devotion, protection, loyalty, and love. When Aleksander kissed her at the ceremony's conclusion, the court erupted in applause, and Lydia felt the truth of their bond sing through her. This was real. This was forever, or as close to forever as a human could get. The celebration lasted for 3 days, and by the end of it, Lydia was exhausted but happy. She danced with vampires who'd lived through the Renaissance, shared wine with beings who remembered the fall of Rome, and been toasted by a king who loved her beyond reason. On the 4th night, when things finally quieted, she and Aleksander retreated to his chambers, their chambers now. He'd already moved all her belongings in, merging their spaces completely. "Queen Lydia," he said, testing out the title. "It suits you." "It still sounds strange. I went from cataloging books in a dusty shop to being queen of the vampires in less than a year. That's not a normal trajectory. Nothing about us is normal, but it's ours, and it's real. And that's what matters." He pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, resting her head against his chest where a heart no longer beat. "I spent 3,000 years believing I'd outgrown the capacity for this kind of love. You proved me wrong, Lydia. You brought light into centuries of darkness." "You saved my life," she countered. "You could have killed me that first night, but you offered tea instead. You gave me choices, protected me, let me keep my humanity while giving me enough time to make this real. You gave me everything. Then we saved each other." He tilted her face up, his crimson eyes soft. "And we'll keep saving each other, keep choosing each other, for as long as we both exist." "That's a long time." "Yes, and I'm looking forward to every moment of it." He kissed her then, and she felt through their bond his absolute certainty, his unwavering love, his commitment to their shared future. And she knew that whatever came, whatever challenges they'd face as human and vampire, mortal and immortal, they'd face it together. Years passed, decades. Lydia aged slowly, exactly as promised, watching the world change on the screens that showed the city above, while her own world remained constant in the court below. She became a true queen, helping Aleksander govern, mediating disputes, pushing for progressive changes that brought the vampire world closer to the human one. She stayed in contact with the human world through the phone Theodore had given her, watching from afar as her sister's children grew up, as her mother aged and eventually passed. That loss hurt, knowing she couldn't attend the funeral, couldn't comfort her family. But Aleksander held her through the grief, and the bond between them eased the pain. 50 years after her arrival in the court, Lydia stood in front of a mirror, studying her reflection. She looked perhaps 30 now, maybe 35. Not the 26-year-old who'd stumbled into Aleksander's chambers, but not elderly either. She had aged 5 years in 5 decades, and she had centuries ahead of her still. Alexander appeared behind her in the reflection, still unchanged, still beautiful and ancient and hers. "Regrets?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her waist. "None. You?" "Never." She turned in his embrace, looking up at the vampire king who'd given her tea instead of death, who'd offered her choices when he could have simply taken what he wanted, who'd loved her enough to bind his existence to hers. "I love you," she said. "Today, tomorrow, for all the centuries to come. I love you, Alexander. And I love you, my darling wife, my human queen, my Lydia. Today and always." They kissed as they had 1,000 times before, and the bond between them sang with joy and love and absolute certainty. This was their happy ending, their triumph over the impossible, their proof that sometimes the strangest love stories were the truest. Lydia had expected death when she'd entered that forbidden chamber all those years ago. Instead, she'd found tea, and choices, and love beyond measure. She'd found home in the arms of a vampire king, and eternity in the space of a mortal lifetime extended. And she'd never been happier. The court continued around them, the modern world evolved above them, but in their private chambers, in the space they'd created together, time held no meaning. There was only love, deep and true and forever, exactly as it should be.